Welcome, everyone, to Mythstorie, a podcast about myths and history. I am one of your beloved hosts, Bryant, and Cammy's here too.
I am.
Hey, Cammy, my permanent guest. He's been here since the beginning. Cammy, we've been gone a little bit.
Yes, some much needed rest.
Yeah, 2022 has been busy. We've been busy. I was really hoping some new myths would form in the last 2 months.
Turns out that's going to take 1,000 years for us to know.
Couple thousand, yeah, on average. So that's okay. There's a lot of material we haven't covered. But if you're new to the show, take a look on our Pinecast page. You can see all our topics that we have covered. We also have YouTube. We've got a lot of old stuff that we've covered. That's really fun. Today, we're keeping it simple, keeping it Greek. Cammy, who are we touching on today?
We're touching on King Midas.
That's right. Yeah. So Midas Touch, that guy, I'm sure you know him. And it's funny because I kind of forgot about him because I think some cartoon has mentioned, this idea of turning to gold or something like that.
It seemed really prevalent when I was a kid. I don't know if it was when you were a kid.
There was definitely something from that. And then, of course, there's the I think it's an auto parts company.
Oh,
they do automotive service company. Yeah.
They're sponsoring this. So
they are. Yeah. Thanks, guys. No, they're not. Please feel free to. What a good way to do that. We got to find all the companies that stole Greek stuff. How do we get Nike on board? Anyway, Nika. So the show is going to be Cammy. She's going to give us a story from talking about Midas, the typical legend and tale. And then after that, we're going to have a little discussion that I'll lead where I'll talk about some of the history. This one's going to be pretty familiar if you're familiar with the ancient Greek stuff. Not a lot of stuff's changed on that since we've discussed it. But this was really interesting because of me kind of forgetting about Midas. I didn't realize how prevalent he actually was throughout history, even because he pops up in like the 19th century. He's pretty famous, like a lot of other legends and myths. So, Cammy, please regale us with the story of King Midas.
Okay, so my source is Theoi, and I used Ovid's Metamorphosis. They had an excerpt from that, a couple of them actually, that just described the story basically. So, after many nights of reverie in the dim canopy of the forest of Thrace, Bacchus led his train of merry worshippers to Pactolus, where the pious people of that place lived under a greedy ruler, King Midas. These people, so eager to please their king, brought to him the satyr, Silenus, old and wine-soaked, wrapped in the garland of the forest. Midas, who knew Silenus through the Thracian Orpheus, had worshipped Bacchus with the satyr and shared his rites. He held a festival for 10 days with the satyr to welcome him, the two drinking wine and remembering the god. On the 11th day, Midas traveled with his captive to the land of Lydia, where he reunited the satyr with his godly companion. Bacchus, heartful at seeing his foster father, granted a wish upon the king. Midas, greedy and reckless, spoke these words: "Everything I touch shall change to gold." Bacchus, no fan of the trickery of the jinn, hung his head in sorrow as he said, "It is done." But the king, fond of his new misfortune, began to test his powers, reaching for a branch, picking up a rock, running his hand over the wheat field. Everything now the yellow glisten of gold. It wasn't until nightfall, and hungry as he was, he sat down to a feast, his power now released as a curse. He could not devour even the smallest morsel fed to him on a golden spoon, for everything turned hard and metallic in his mouth. Even the wine past his lips became liquid gold. Cursing the god, Midas put on his golden shoes and swung open his golden door and trudged along the path to Lydia, a golden tree for every point he stopped to rest. Finding the immortal, he begged for his powers to be recalled, and the god, seeing the change in this man, led him to a stream of Sardis and instructed him to walk the river to its source. There he would be cleansed of the curse he wished upon himself, and he walked the river. It flowed and washed the man of his power, leaving the waters and sand themselves to this day tinted gold.
That's very nice. That's it. That's the story. And I never realized Dionysus was involved. That's who he asked, that's who cured him of it. And he's Midas is involved in these stories, the Greek tales. I always, just the way that they're presented when I'm younger, I always think they're just so isolated, and I really love that. Also, I just had a thought while you were reading. I wonder if, because of me looking into this, I wonder if Austin Power Gold member will be any different. I wonder if there's some kind of literary connection there. Just a thought. Just a thought. Well, I'll report back later if I watch that film. So Midas is quite an old tale. King Midas is quite an old tale, and it's pretty interesting because there's the name Midas isn't. It's used a lot throughout history. There was a King Midas ruling in Phrygia, which is where he was the Phrygian king in Anatolia, the Golden Touch Midas, and this Phrygian King Midas was in the late 8th century BC. And it is said that he committed suicide. And there's some sort of an idea that this might be euhemeristic. We've used this word before, where myth is kind of created to explain history. Like, you try and give history as fact, but sometimes it gets a little mythical. So there's this fun connection there, but it is there are sort of ideas and texts through like Assyrian connections that this Midas is said to have believed to have been around the 2nd millennium BC. What's fun too, I don't know if you caught onto this. Did you see who his dad is? Who King Midas's father is?
No, I didn't read much of Theoia. I just got the
No, that's fine.
myth.
So his father is King Gordius, who found the Phrygian capital city of Gordium, and is believed to have been the tire of the Gordian knot, which is the famous sort of parable from Alexander the Great's time. This was the 2nd millennium, 1600 years later. So the idea is that Midas took place like well before the Trojan War. Was Midas's time.
Wow.
And interesting, theory or Wikipedia notes that you don't even actually get a mention of Midas or King Gordius, his father, in his works, or Homer's works, I should say. So, but he specifically mentions 2 other Phrygian kings, Mygdon and Otreus. So the Phrygians are verified through Homer's texts, but these 2 dudes are not, although they're so essential. The Midas touch. I'll even argue that there's another story, Midas, where he gets an ass's ears. That seems to come up more, honestly. When I was on Theoi's website, that story was brought up more. Now, I mean, to go to the original sources,
that story is we talked about the golden ass, and that basically that's what happens in that, and it's what happens in William Shakespeare's
Nick
Midsummer
Bottom.
Night's Dream.
And it is that story of getting an animal, specifically like a horse's or an ass's ears, seems to come up a ton. Wikipedia talks about it in other cultures. Pre-Islamic legends in Asia talk about this, and there's actually an Irish legend of a king with a horse or donkey ears. And what's really cool in Midas's case and in this Irish case, they both specifically there's like a hair cutter for the king, and King Midas is hiding his ears, and then the Irish king is hiding his ears, and the person who cuts his hair, his barber, finds out, and then like Midas is like, hey, I'll kill you, and the Irish king's like, I'll kill you if you tell anyone. And he's like, oh, I gotta tell someone. So he like goes to the ground, and he's like, King Midas has ass ears, or Irish guy has ass ears. And then the plants like come out and tell everybody, because you can't trust plants. Jeez,
you can't trust plants.
It's horrible. Why would you do that? And so it's just interesting that there are these stories that are so similar. An Irish legend and this Midas legend of a king getting ass's ears, and then the barber spilling the beans to some plants, and then those plants telling everybody. So thought that was really interesting. But the original sources are Herodotus, the Greek historian from the 5th century BC, Strabo, from the 1st century BC to 1st century AD. All these Greek dudes talk about it up to the 2nd century AD. There's tons of Romans, Ovid, Metamorphosis, Pliny the Elder, and one of my favorite time periods, the Byzantine or Greek medieval Roman period. Suidas in the Suda also discusses Midas. So, and that was the 10th century AD.
One thing that I find interesting about this story from Ovid, and it does go on to like the ass's ears
Mhm.
is a little bit later in the same story. But with this story, the conclusion of it is not that Midas changed and he had this golden power because he relinquished the power.
Mhm.
What really changed was himself. So I thought that was really interesting. There was like an interchange that you don't usually see in the
Yeah,
Metamorphosis.
and that's worth noting that Ovid specifically kind of wanted to give that story too. Aristotle had the idea that he believes Midas died of starvation as a result of his vain prayer for the gold touch. And I think I without going too crazy, I think that's where there's the idea that Midas like drank ox blood to kill himself, and there's this idea that the 8th century Midas drank ox blood to kill himself.
Will that
There's
kill
this,
you?
hey kids, new YouTube challenge. Grab a cup of ox blood. I imagine it wouldn't be great. I imagine it would not be great. But it's how he killed himself. It was very specific in this, that the Midas of the 8th century BC killed himself that way. And I perhaps that's where this connection is coming from, of a Midas committing suicide. And sometimes, you know how it is. You're not, when you're a Greek boy learning stuff, you're not going to go, excuse me, did you mean Midas from the 2nd millennium or before Christ? And then he's like, who's Christ? And he's like, I don't know, BC. But the Theory, we've mentioned. Theory is a great resource, theoi.com. It has the best write-up. If you ever want to get lost in Greek mythology with accurate sources, just head to that website and go through. It basically kind of confirms everything. Midas's connection with Dionysus, Silenos, the elderly companion god. He got the golden touch. He washed it off specifically in the river Pactylos, which, here we go with another euhemeristic idea. The modern river, throughout history, has known for its heavy deposits of gold. So there's a cool euhemeristic explanation of why this river has so much gold in it. It's because Midas, he dipped in it and lost his powers. But then he continued on, got ass's ears, did his thing. So it's pretty awesome to see. I never would have thought that Midas was so involved. And even I won't go too much farther into it, but a couple other big things Midas was involved in: a musical contest between the gods, including Pan. Which he had, this involved his ears. He also is credited with being the founder of the city of Ankara, which is the capital of Turkey, a huge metropolitan city, a very important Greek city, for and Roman and Byzantine and Ottoman city, for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and thousands of years. What's fun, I pulled up its Wikipedia page just to kind of look through the Gauls, the Galatians actually were in there in 278 BC for a little while. They just decided to like run around for a little while with their pants. And before it getting to the Romans and then Byzantines and so on. So I thought that was really interesting. So, and it's another big thing too. I forgot to mention this at the top of my notes. Midas is credited with being the Phrygian king of Anatolia, but historians say that they started off towards Europe, and he specifically migrated them. So Anatolia is like the land bridge of Europe and Asia. He migrated them to the Asian side of the Anatolian peninsula, or not peninsula, but plateau. He pushed them towards the Asian side of it, and that's when they became the Phrygians. I think they called them like Bridgians with a B before that. But then you go to Asia, you bring peas with you. So yeah, it's really wild. I never would have thought Midas was the founder of such. I mean, and Ankara, it's been like called Ankara since Midas's time, and that it's just one of those cities that it's an ancient city, and it's the capital of Turkey. So it's a huge city. A very, very important city that's still around today. So that's pretty much all I've got on Midas. I'll just for kicks, just because maybe you're a car lover and you ended up clicking on this episode for that reason. The Midas Automotive Service, founded 65 years ago. So that's pretty cool. It's been going on for a while. It's an acronym, Cammy: Muffler Installation Dealers Associated Service. There you
Wow.
go. Myth busted. Um, and it was, their slogan is "Trust the Midas Touch." I trust the Midas Touch now, Cammy. He had the man's greed and hubris to want. He was like, yeah, touching gold, everything being gold, that's a great idea. And he was like, you know what? It wasn't a good idea. I should not do that. And he went and then had a rap battle with gods, and this guy, I trust him. So, I used to think people would joke, oh, don't trust the Midas touch, it turns into gold. And there's a famous 19th century painting where Midas is holding his daughter, who he turned to gold, by Nathaniel Hawthorne. That was a big thing in the 19th century, like showing this, and oh no, like, I turned my daughter to gold because I forgot I had this magic power. But it's good. You should trust the Midas touch, because in the end, Midas was responsible enough to revoke this great power.
Wasn't there a book by Roald Dahl about the chocolate?
Yeah,
I
there's
remember
something
like you talking about this. I'm like, I remember something, and like he turned his parents to chocolate, maybe.
The Chocolate Touch by Patrick Skeen Catling. I only had this up because the Wikipedia page is up and it's there. Yes, it is a children's book about a boy who touches everything who turns everything he touches to chocolate. So
Yeah,
it's,
I remember reading that when I was a kid, or at least seeing the cover. I don't know.
yeah, Patrick Skeen Catling was the author of that. I had not seen that before this, but I'm not surprised. Disney also did something called The Golden Touch, a silly symphony cartoon, in 1935. So probably not worth watching. You might get offended. But yeah, it's cool. It's interesting to see that that's really what stuck. I mean, it's pretty obvious why it stuck, why it was so important. But Midas, much more than just the Golden Touch, is the takeaway here, and really fun to look into that and see how he kept coming up through history. And while the touch was important, was not the be all end all. Unless you're Aristotle, then you don't think much of him, apparently. So, Cammy, it's good to have you back here in your show that you founded.
It's good to be back.
And everyone, thank you so much for hanging with us. I just have to say, in general, the show, while we weren't, doing weekly episodes recently, the show's still been growing. We appreciate new listeners coming in. If you're here years later from 2/15/2022 when we record this, welcome. Please take a look at the catalog. One thing we did do that I just want to mention: a lot of the older episodes I have privated because they just kind of are rough. The quality of them was quite rough, and we don't think it shows how awesome we are accurately. We don't want someone to come in and be like, oh, these guys aren't great. So there is a way to listen to them, though. If you tip us on Pinecast, if you're interested in that, contact us, mythstorie@gmail.com, or just hit up Cammy or me on Facebook. Mythstorie, all one word, story with an I-E, not to be confused with our French counterparts, Mythstoire, that I keep accidentally spelling whenever I type it up. So, Cammy, anything you want to add?
No, I think that's it.
All right, everyone. Well, let us know if you have any ideas for future episodes, and we will see you next time.
Oh.
I don't know what to say.